Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to Measure What Matters. My name is Mark Overholser, and I am honored to be here speaking at SAINTCON. Thank you all for coming out. Who am I? You could read the slide if you want, but I assure you, despite the way I look, I have been in security for more than 10 years. I started in IT when I was 15, working for my high school. I assure you, I'm older than I look. I work for Corelight as a technical marketing engineer. I've been there for 6 years now, and I also have the honor of having been a threat hunter in the Black Hat Conference Network Operations Center for the past couple of years with people like Nibble. Where did he go? There you go. You were here, you were there, and then you were here, and then you were here.
I like the soul reference, but
oh yes, it's just a movie. All right, so I'm going to talk about measuring what matters, and this is measurement for blue teams specifically. So we're talking like if you're measuring for a security operations center in particular, this is the main focus, and it's sort of more beginner level, but these are things I wish I had known when I was building out an information security team years and years and years ago. Oh my gosh, so many years ago. So why measure? Without data, I say, and others will say this too, you're just guessing. Without data, you're just guessing. I also like that figuring out things to measure and putting that down on paper, it forces you and your stakeholders to agree on what is of value, and that is critical. And it also forces you to agree on how to talk about what is of value, which you're going to have to do as you interface with the rest of the business. And then a side benefit, having data places you in a position to defend your team's values. When a security team comes under scrutiny because it's a cost center, having measurement of things that you and the business agree are of value allows you to demonstrate, here is the value that we have been providing and that we're going to continue to provide. Very important. So how to measure? First, foremost, most important, absolutely critical, be very clear about your definitions. So this means making definitions, writing them down, referring to them, negotiating them with others, because you will disagree about things. You will get into a situation where there will be discord or conflict about whether or not something is an incident, for example, or how severe it is, or what should we work on first, right? Going back to the previous presenter's talk about vulnerabilities and vulnerability management, if you're not defining what is the most severe vulnerability, what is the second most severe, what is the third most, or how you're going to measure that severity, you will not be able to decide which things you need to put money towards fixing and which ones steal money away from others, for example. So here's an example of a definition of an incident. Now, I stole this from the NIST Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity version 1.1, which of course, if you Google that, you can find the whole PDF. I'm sure it's hundreds of pages. But this in there somewhere is this definition. A cybersecurity event, an incident is defined as a cybersecurity event that has been determined to have an impact on the organization, prompting the need for response and recovery. It's very simplistic, but I think it's a good place to start. And you can start here, and then you can change it if you need to later. But having this allows you to, with somebody else, when you disagree about whether or not something is an incident, to come and ask questions. Did we determine that this has had an impact on the organization? Or is this something that might have an impact on the organization in some other circumstances, right? And then if so, if it has been determined to have an impact, it becomes an incident, and then you agree, it prompts the need for response and recovery, right? Another thing, how to measure, be smart. Now, I steal this from project management. If you've ever taken a project management course, you've probably come across the acronym SMART. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Now, of course, if we're talking about measurement, you should hope that your thing that you want to measure is measurable. If it's not, you're out, right? Specific. You want things to be specific because otherwise there's ambiguity, and ambiguity is the enemy of what you're trying to do. We're going to cross out achievable. I don't think we should be trying to set necessarily achievable goals. So you want to keep it in mind, but the goal is to measure, and we'll get to why I don't want to talk about achievability in a little bit later, but things should be relevant. If you're measuring things that are not relevant, you are wasting time. You are spending time and energy on things that are not going to benefit you. And finally, time-bound. You want things to be time-bound. Otherwise, if you're going to talk about the number of incidents when? In the last week, the number of incidents in the last month, the number of incidents in the last quarter. Without time boundaries, your definitions are ambiguous, right? Let's watch out for some common mistakes in measuring. One mistake would be changing definitions midstream. You want to be comparing apples to apples. So if you have a definition for something that you're measuring and then you decide we don't like that and we're going to change the definition, what you need to do is to stop. You change your definition and you start measuring a new way, but you stop comparing that to the previous way that you were measuring it, right? So if you're saying we're up 20% week over week for incidents, but you've changed the definition of incident, then you're wrong, right? You reset the counter and you say, I'm starting again this week. And next week, when my definition is still the same, I can compare that metric to this week's metric, but I can't compare this week's to last week if I've changed the definition, right? So watch out for that. Another mistake, and this is probably the most common mistake that I see, not just in information security or even in information technology, but in the world, is that people measure what's convenient. They reach for metrics that are easily available or easy to measure versus measuring something that is important, right? So a couple of examples here. My appliance gives me this stat, so therefore it must be important. Not necessarily true, right? There were 7 million block connections on the firewall last week. What does that mean? What question is that answering? Why is that significant? You really need to focus on sitting down and asking yourself, what is significant? And how does it relate to the things that you and your stakeholders have determined are of value? And focus on measuring those things. Another mistake that is that can happen pretty easily is to not realize that what you're measuring is a proxy. Now, I don't necessarily mean an HTTP proxy, right? But a proxy is a substitute. It is something that you expect tracks the metric that you want, but that you might struggle to measure directly. This example is not IT related, but I think it's a pretty good one. In the US, we track physical age as a proxy for intellectual and emotional maturity, right? If you go to the store and you want to buy something that is age restricted, like alcohol or tobacco or a lottery ticket, they measure your age, right? They look at your identification to see, are you 18? Are you 21? Are you whatever age you need to be in order to buy this? It is being used as a proxy for intellectual maturity and emotional maturity, assuming that people who are older are more intellectually mature and therefore able to do the risk assessment about the usage of something like alcohol or tobacco and to make a wise decision. But I think if I were to poll people, maybe we would agree that not all 21-year-olds are emotionally mature enough to make that decision. Maybe not even all 40-year-olds are emotionally mature enough to make that decision or intellectually mature enough to make that decision. But it is the best thing we have because you cannot expect the person at the quick stop to be able to look at you and say, yeah, you are intelligent enough to know how to manage your risk when using alcohol or tobacco. It's just not practical. So they have to give them something they can measure. It is a proxy for something else that we would rather measure in an ideal circumstance, but we can't. So all of that to say, be on the lookout for when the things that you are measuring, whether are you measuring something that is measuring what you want directly, or is it something that is like close to it that's probably correlated, but maybe not necessarily 100% ideal. You want to keep that in mind and be aware of it when you're measuring. Now, this goes back to the idea of getting rid of that achievability, right? Crossing that out and saying we're not going to care about whether or not a measure is achievable, because one major mistake is placing an incentive to hit a certain benchmark. As soon as, this is Goodhart's law, right? You can look that up. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And the reason that it ceases to be a good measure is that because once it becomes a target, people will change their behavior in order to try to hit the target, right? If you measure how long it takes from the time that you assign a ticket to an individual who's going to work the ticket in a security operations center, if you measure the time from assignment to when they click the acknowledgement button, that's a good measure. But if you start saying that you get a bonus if your average acknowledgement over the quarter is less than 15 minutes, then people are going to go in and they're going to click the acknowledgement button before they even read the ticket. And then they might not read the ticket. They might click the acknowledgement button and then move on to the next ticket because they saw there was another one and go click the acknowledgement button there. And then they'll circle back to it. And then you think you're measuring how quickly they are looking at the ticket, but you're not. You're measuring how quickly they're looking at the acknowledgement button, right? So keep that in mind. If you give a team a target, you unintentionally potentially pressure them to do whatever it takes to hit that target. And that's not what you want. You want to let them work in uninfluenced conditions, and you want to measure those things. So keep that in mind. So what should we measure from an information security standpoint? Of course, information security will probably work with other teams that are working on projects that are moving things forward. In those cases, you want to focus on what are KPIs, key performance indicators for the success of the project. A while ago, I worked on a project upgrading Windows, trying to get rid of Windows XP from an environment, move over to Windows 7. So KPIs are how many Windows XP installations are still present, and then also what is our velocity? How many of those are we removing per time period, per week, per month, or whatever? Or if you're transitioning from an old VPN appliance to a new VPN appliance, you want to measure number of daily active users on each and the velocity in move from one to the other, things like that. So keep in mind, KPIs are very important to measure. From a pure blue team or incident response perspective, mean time to detection is an important thing to measure, right? This, like most measures, I think you should always be able to assign a question that they answer. In this case, the question that it answers is, do we have good visibility? Are we detecting things? How quickly are we detecting things, right? So this is the mean of the time from the estimated start of the incident to the awareness of the incident, when the organization is aware of the incident. And then keep in mind, you may not be able to measure these things. We'll get to that in a second. But this is one to strive for. Mean time to detection. Mean time to acknowledgement, right? We talked about acknowledgement earlier. And this answers the question, do we have enough analysts? Because if your acknowledgement time is increasing, that might mean that your workload is increasing and your team size needs to increase, right? Or it might be steady and you say that's good. Or you might look at it and then go talk to the business and they say, well, actually, I would like to have an SLA with you where the acknowledgement is actually faster. And then you say, I need more people in order to do that, right? This is the mean of the time from the ticket creation or assignment to its acknowledgement. Now, you notice I said creation or assignment. That was ambiguous. So you would have to decide for your organization which of those things, where do those firm edges exist so that you can measure the distance. MTTR could mean a lot of things, right? My colleague here, Jason, he wrote a whole nice long article about this, and there's a lot of ambiguity if you just say MTTR. It could mean mean time to response. It could mean mean time to recovery. It could mean mean time to resolution or remediation. You could have 4 different MTTRs that measure those 4 things. They each have different definitions. Again, be very clear about the definition. But what MTTR measures and answers the question, are we dealing with incidents quickly? Once we have established that something is an incident, are we dealing with it quickly and effectively? For response, I propose the definition here, time from detection to when incident response begins, okay? And then for remediation, time from the start of incident response to when incident response ends or closes. And resolution, time from the start of incident response to, for example, all systems being 90% of pre-incident capability. Just throwing out some definitions here. You might be comfortable with them, copy them, paste them into your own document, cool. Or you might decide that they need tweaking, that's fine. You change it all to suit what you need to do in your own organization. This is a very important one. Percentage of closure and also different types of closure. I struggled with this one for a long time because I think subconsciously I didn't want to admit that there were things I couldn't get to, that I couldn't look at, that I couldn't close. And saying, that we're closing an incident or closing a ticket as can't resolve or I don't know is admitting failure. And I think I needed to give myself permission to admit failure. And I think I give all of you permission to admit failure or admit defeat on an individual basis because it gives you a place to move from. So, for example, I have a table here, closure reason, expired, solved, or not solvable. These are some examples of things that you could say, like when you're closing the ticket, I'm closing the ticket as expired. Like it was assigned 7 days ago and it hasn't been figured out, you would close it as expired. What time interval that is would be up to your organization, but it allows you to also answer the question, do we have enough people? Are they skilled enough? Things like that, right? And you can see whether or not you're improving over time. And closed solved and closed not solvable. Like you also want to be able to give yourself permission to say, I do not have the information required to answer this question. I do not have the information required to close this incident out. And that gives you an important metric to be able to go to your management or to the business and say, I need more funding for tooling, right? I need to buy this tooling to get visibility. I need to buy that tooling, or I need to be able to build this tooling or that tooling to get the information that I need to be able to close an incident like this when it happens in the future. So let's go through some examples. I have an incident timeline here. We have first, the user clicked on a link in a phishing email. Then they entered their credentials into the phishing site. Then there was a login to a virtual desktop by the threat actor using phished credentials. I say that this is when the incident started, because prior to that, there was no impact on the organization, right? Just the credentials leaking did not actually affect the organization. It changed their the level of risk that the organization is at, but it didn't actually do anything to the organization. Once somebody took advantage of having those leaked credentials to log into a system from the outside that they shouldn't have had access to, that's when the impact began. So that's when the incident started. And then we have some failed RDP sessions from that virtual desktop to the domain controller. Maybe they logged into an ERP system and extracted some invoice data. Then they finally got into the domain controller via RDP later, and then they deployed ransomware via GPO, and maybe that's when the organization detected it once all their systems were ransomed. So the time to detect runs from January 15th through January 19th, right? That's the distance from when the first login occurred and then when they finally realized what was happening. Another example here, this gives us more of those measures. We have question marks, stuff we don't know at the beginning. Then later we get an alert for users' computer scanning the network on several different ports, alerts for multiple failed authentication attempts to a core switch via SSH, a security analyst reviewing the alert and promoting it to an incident, then the security analyst initiating quarantine of the end user's device, hardware tech retrieving the device and replacing it with a new device, and then the user's credentials being reset. So I think this is a more realistic example. There might be things that happen prior to you detecting the incident that you just don't know. You don't know that the user clicked on a link. You don't know if they downloaded a file and ran it. You might not know because you don't have telemetry for that. So detection here is when the alert fired for the port scanning. And then we have a time to detect from the incident start to detection, and we actually don't know what the interval is there. Then we have the time to acknowledgement from detection to a security analyst actually reviewing it. And then the security analyst initiating quarantine, that gives us the differential from act to response, which gives us the time to respond. And then once the credentials are reset, that gives us our time to resolution. Another thing that I really want to talk about is risk. This is a thing I think organizations should be measuring, and in particular, information security organizations. And it answers the question, a couple of questions. Are risk levels acceptable for the business? And are we improving the risk profile? And especially, are we improving the risk profile commensurate with the amount of money that we're spending to do that? Right? That's very important. So I wasn't quite sure how to measure risk when I was managing a team, but I think I have a good way to do it now. And I'm exploiting basic statistics, expected value. If you've had a statistics class, you know that it is probability times a value gives you the expected value, right? You can use this to calculate things like how likely you are to lose money at a casino, and as you are likely to lose money at a casino. I'll do that calculation for you. For risk, I say impact times likelihood. This is still ambiguous because we haven't defined how to measure impact or likelihood, but I will give you an example of one way that I started, right? So this is a risk register. Yes, it's in a spreadsheet. Yes, spreadsheets are databases. Extremely hot take. So I've listed the vulnerabilities or the exposures. I've assigned them probabilities. Probability ranges from 1 to 10. I've assigned them an impact too, which is essentially like how bad is this going to be if it happens, also from 1 to 10. So now I can calculate risk. It's literally just probability times impact. So those values then range from 1 to 100, which means I can rank them. I can stack rank them, and I can say this is the largest risk item. This is the second largest risk item. The other thing I can do here is I can assign money values to them. I can say, for us to address item number 1, we need this control. It's going to cost this amount of money, right? It might cost $5,000. It might cost $25,000. It might cost $250,000 or more. The problem here is I still can't, I can't measure the risk profile versus the amount of money or resources that we're going to spend to try to address it. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a small adjustment here, and that is I'm going to switch to measuring probability as a percentage. In this case, I'm saying it is a probability in percentage points that this thing will occur in a 90-day period, time bounded, right? I'm saying what is the likelihood this will happen in a 90-day period, and then what is the impact in dollars to the organization if this thing occurs. Now, again, our probability or our calculated risk is literally just the probability times the impact, but it turns out to be then a numerical currency value. It is in dollars. And this is important because businesses speak dollars, and your controls are going to cost you dollars as well, right? Even if they cost you time is money too. And you can figure out how much a person costs based on how much you pay them and what it costs to supply their benefits, right? So you know, if I'm getting this many hours of labor out of a person per year and I'm paying this salary and the benefits cost that much, then every hour of their time is worth this amount of money. So this allows us then to, again, stack rank and say, what are the most important things? What are the least important things? And then also critically to be able to compare the cost to address that thing versus the what the potential risk is in dollars, right? So I apologize. I didn't tell you that there was going to be math, and then I just sort of mathed on you. But I think everybody could probably survive. This is a spreadsheet I think any of you, having taken this picture of this spreadsheet, can make in 15 minutes with Excel or Google Sheets or your favorite spreadsheet application and be off and running. You will outgrow it at some points, right? I said spreadsheets are databases, but let's be honest, databases are also databases, but they're better at it. And scale vertically much, much better. Final question, I think it's the final question. What if I don't know? So I've told you to measure things like mean time to detection, which ranges from the time that the incident began until it was detected. So what if I don't know when the incident began? What if I don't know when the impact began? What if I don't know what the likelihood is of something? What if I don't know how big the impact will be? I say take your best guess. Give yourself permission to be wrong. Take your best guess. Reevaluate, right? Go back and see the things that I said a year ago. How do they stack up today? Knowing now things that I didn't know a year ago. And you will improve over time, but you will only do this through experience. So give yourself permission to be wrong. I give you permission to be wrong. I'm wrong. I give myself permission to be wrong most of the time. And just try it and see what happens. And then evaluate and say, was I right? Was I wrong? How close was I? What did I need to change to get closer? And you will get better at it as you go. So all of that, I say, thank you for coming, and thank you for letting me math on you.